Hello, everybody. So many people I know. Thank you for coming with us or coming in with us tonight. We're just going to give everybody a couple minutes to pop in, and then we will get started shortly.
And Jessica, because you're going to monitor the chat throughout, right? Sort of.
Yes. Yeah, I'll definitely do that for you.
Yeah. So if you want to interject and ask a question for someone, then that again seems to, then just interrupt me.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Okay, perfect. So we've got 40 people in right now, which is awesome. Thank you all for joining us. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica. I'm Vice President and Communications Chair of the Alberta Horse Trials Association. We also have Kathleen Ziegler with us, who put this all together for us with April, who is also the High Performance Chair. And we hope you guys enjoy this webinar. We've done a couple of these last year, and they had a really good turnout. So we're really excited to be offering these again for you, for everybody. And so I guess I'll go ahead and turn it over to April Clay, and she'll go ahead and share her screen now and give her a little introduction of herself, and then go ahead and go into the presentation.
Okay, I think we're good to go. So thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Kathleen, for your organization of this evening. And it seems like it's going to be a good evening to be in and not outside. So hopefully we can have a good discussion about developing confident riders. A little bit about myself. So my first life was as a competitive hunter jumper rider. And so within that time, I did some judging as well. And I also did some coaching. And then my second life here has been as a psychologist. And at this time, I do work with athletes, and I work with a lot of riders because it's still near and dear to my heart. And it's such a fascinating and unique sport. And as well, I do a lot of clinical work, working with depression, anxiety, trauma. And another way actually that I work with riders is with other types of athletes and people is with traumatic injuries and coming back from those, and also concussion recovery. So I have a lot of different opportunities to see riders. And I haven't done a coach's session for a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm just really happy that this is such a great turnout. And I gave myself a big topic, I will say, developing more confident riders and how to do that. So obviously there's going to be, some things that you don't hear about tonight that maybe you would have expected to, but what I did is from our survey, and also from, really what I've been hearing in practice for the last little while, I decided on, on 4 keys that we were going to talk about in terms of developing confident riders. But it looks like we should start with a definition, because it is a term that gets thrown around a lot. So in terms of its origin, the word confidence comes from a Latin word, fidere, which means to trust. And so having self-confidence is having trust in oneself. One of the things that I like to make a distinction with is that because we tend to refer to confidence a lot as if it's a feeling or it's an emotion, confidence is not an emotion. Confidence is a knowing. It's a knowing that you can do a certain thing, or that you have the willingness to risk doing a certain thing. So it is a knowing that's ongoing, and yes, it can come and go. But a really important distinction I find is to say that it is not a feeling, because then, and I'm sure you guys have heard this ad nauseum, you have a rider that comes in and says, I'm feeling confident today. And then the next day it's, I'm not feeling confident. And when you ask them why, they're not even sometimes sure, why are they feeling confident or not, or how to get that back. And it really is treated more like a feeling, whereas you can certainly have a nervous rider, for example, who is still feeling confidence in their ability to meet the challenge. So throughout this webinar, we're going to be coming back to that idea of confidence as a knowing and developing that. Because as you can see in the picture, it would be nice if we could, and our horses go down aisle 2 and pick up some confidence on sale. But since we can't do that, we will look at the next best thing. So yes, these are our 4 keys to developing rider confidence. Okay, our first, oops, it's not clicking there, is to create an environment of psychological safety. So in terms of learning, the most fundamental need that people have is to feel safe in their environment. And so that can mean a lot of different things. We'll look at some of them. Psychological safety means that riders should understand your philosophy of coaching and sport. It should be something that you communicate to them. And as all of us are redefining success and coaching all the time, it's a moving target, that we keep up this communication. So knowing what having your riders know what you stand for is one way that they can feel safe. Communicating clear leadership on how to treat each other, and also in this sport, how to treat horses. So communicating your standards of care, communicating your standards of care in terms of other people. So, what you will and won't tolerate in terms of people speaking to one another, that you wanted to create a respectful environment where people can speak up. And this is really important, of course, is that your behavior is consistent with your stated approach. So it can be nice to talk about all these things. And yes, I'm creating a respectful environment. But if, for example, you're talking to your riders negatively about other riders in your barn, or even other riders outside of your barn, then they might end up mistrusting you in terms of, well, if that's capable there, then I might be talked about. So staying consistent, staying aware, we're all going to make mistakes on that. Owning those is another thing that can help people feel safe in an environment. And so this is not, psychological safety is not about being nice or even being comfortable. It's about it's a set of standards, that creates as much as we can, a consistent approach to sport, a place where people feel safe enough to speak up, and know how to do that speaking up. So if you kind of look at this, and this certainly by all means is not a complete checklist, but how many questions can your riders answer yes to here? So I know how to contact my coach if I have a problem. And so that literally means I know that they want to be contacted by text, by email, by phone. This is how I can contact them. I know my coach will keep our conversations private. So is that something that's discussed, is explicit with the other person, that, you know what, you can trust me that what we talk about is just between us. Now, of course, if you're teaching kids, you might have the occasion where you are concerned about the child. And so you would need to preemptively say to both parent and child that there are certain things that, you know, if they concern me in terms of your health and welfare, that I'm going to want to take further steps. I'm going to want to see about us, you know, collaborating on some further help, just so that child knows. I know my coach will treat me with respect and listen. So this means when you are speaking with them, do they have your full attention? And are you listening? Are you able to give them some feedback in terms of what they said? I know I can speak up without being put down. So even if they're coming to you with something that's really conflicting to them, or they're having a problem, that they're not going to be judged for bringing that thing forward, that it's going to be known that you're there to help them work through it, even if it's not as big of a problem as if you feel that way as they do, that you're there to help them work through it. I know I can ask for help. So again, knowing that you're accessible for that. And that doesn't mean, of course, that you're all responsible for providing all of that help. It means that you're the first link in the chain, usually. So if you have someone come to you that needs a specific kind of help, and you can provide some guidelines and come up with a plan with them, and they know that you can do this for them, again, that's another pillar of trust. I know my coach has my back and we are working together. So more and more now, actually, you know, it used to be in the literature, they were studying what they would have called coach-centered philosophy. That moved to athlete-centered. And now, interestingly, we are at more research being directed towards coach-athlete-centered, and exploring that relationship and how much that relationship means to performance outcomes. And of course, other things like mental health, learning environment. So, and we do know that psychological safety is associated with strong athlete-coach relationships, and it does lead to good performances. And it makes sense if you think about it. It's very much like a child that's being, you know, bullied at school and no one knows about it, or something else is happening at school, no one knows about it, is every day entering a place that feels unsafe to them. And because of that, they are not going to be able to learn. And the same is true for athletes. If they are entering an environment every day where they feel some degree of not being safe, then that is going to capture their attention to an extent that it's going to inhibit some of their learning capability. It is also going to result in less risk-taking. That's something that the research is pretty strong about. So an athlete, again, that doesn't feel very safe is reluctant or to take risks. And we know that horse sport is about risk to a certain degree, and you want riders to be able to take those risks. And to do that, they need to trust you. What I would suggest in terms of a very concrete way to approach psychological safety, and I will say that it's, you know, it's not something that you do once and leave alone. Psychological safety is an ongoing, not concern, but it's something that develops over time. But one place to start is to, and perhaps some of you have this already, is to develop a kind of orientation package for your riders So when they come in, they receive a document that states your philosophy of coaching, some of the barn rules, the rules about respect and how we treat each other, how to contact you if they have a problem, and what you can and can't help them with. And so as soon as it's kind of an onboarding thing, as soon as they come on, they at least have something to refer to. And once they've reviewed that, then you can invite them into a discussion about, so what do you think about this? And do you see this as something that can help you feel comfortable in this space, comfortable enough to learn, comfortable enough to risk? Do you have any further concerns? And that as well can be a document that is always being revised, and updated according to your growth and your barn's growth. So that gives you a very concrete place to start in creating some of that psychological safety. Okay. Number 2 is to create a shared language. And we all know that riders, and actually all of us, have an inner critic in our head. And I know coaches, one of their frustrations in terms of helping to build confidence is that they're working against that little gremlin that everybody has in their head, that inner critic, and competing with that, especially when the riders are out alone in the show ring. So in order to create a bigger space for yourself in your rider's head and have at least some presence with that critic, I find it helpful to talk about self-talk as not just self-talk, but it can be about creating a shared language between coach and rider. I'll tell you more about what I mean about that. So yes, riders are impacted by both inner and outer voices. And let's look at first a few tips about cleaning up your own language, or cleaning up your own inner voice, so that you can help your riders do the same. And then some ways that can turn into some shared language between you. Okay, first one is a classic, and it's don't think of a white bear. Keep trying. And we get to finally, yes, I told you. And that's not because I gave you various beautiful pictures of polar bears that you thought about a white bear. This is all about the word don't, and how if we try to suppress our thoughts and say, don't think about that, our brain doesn't understand the instruction don't. And trust me, there was a researcher by the name of Wegman who spent many, many years trying to get people to stop thinking about a white bear, and he was unsuccessful. And what he deemed from that was that, yes, our brains don't process don't very well. So it usually, for example, when you are telling a rider to not do something, so, don't duck over that fence, or don't haul on his mouth, that what's coming through in that instruction is more about hauling on the mouth and not dropping your shoulder. So what you want to do as a coach, and also encourage this in your riders, is to watch those don'ts and make sure that you're turning them into do's. So if you want your rider to stop ducking over a fence, then you need to give some clear instruction about how you want them to get there. So do keep your body square, do look between their ears when you're getting into your jumping position. Whatever it is, it has to be a do instruction in order for it to get through effectively. Have tos. So this is another way that riders often speak to themselves, and sometimes coaches do as well. So, you have to get off of that horse's mouth. And what happens when we speak to ourselves in have tos and we speak to others that way. When we speak to others that way, they tend to feel pushed and they tend to feel judged, as we do when we talk to ourselves that way. So changing those have tos to and shoulds to want tos. So, Jennifer, I know that you want to stay off his mouth in the air through this grid exercise. What can we look at to try and help make that happen? What do you want to try? So turning it into something they want to do, they want to try, because if they can do that, then they're going to be able to feel it. They will have participated in creating it. And those are the kind of experiences that boost confidence, right? Because you're giving them some evidence that they can collaborate with you in choosing things and get the job done, so to speak. Judgments. Okay, so we are all judgy. We are, that's what the human race is. And probably a lot of people would argue that we are more judgy than ever because of social media. And I think someone did mention this in the survey, that it is hard to deal with all the judgments and the social media taking down confidence. And so there's not a lot that we can do about your students' participation in social media, except give them some guidance, but they're on their own with that one. But something that you can do is to help them move from their own judgments that they're having of themselves. So, I can't write this line. I can't do this. I can't keep my heels down, to getting some instructional task talk going, helping them with that, so that they're getting away from judging themselves, which is really them just placing themselves in an order, arbitrary order, which is usually low, to getting them focused back on the task and what it's going to take to get mastery in this particular task. I hope is another phrase that I hear a lot from writers. And every time I hear it, I make a point of correcting it and explaining that basically when we repeat, I hope, so I hope that it goes well today. I hope I don't fall off today. I hope that I get a ribbon, whatever the hope is placing that out of your control. And so guiding that person from making a statement like, I hope, to putting into their self-talk, well, I know, this is what I know. I know that I have a plan for today that I am planning on executing. So getting them into, again, what they already know, what they've already been doing, instead of a judgment about it. Whatever you're encouraging, the type of self-talk you're encouraging in your riders, it's important to know that it needs to be believable to that rider. So you can use a lot of what we'll call motivational self-talk. So this is another way of saying a positive self-talk, like, oh, you got this, you're a great rider, you've got all that it takes to go out there and make it happen today. There's a bit of a problem that can arise with motivational or positive talk, particularly in people who are, that come to you with kind of a smaller sense of self-belief. And so as coaches, you're going to have all kinds of people in that respect, right? I mean, certainly I want to say that you're not responsible for all of their confidence. You can be, and I know that you want to be, the best influence that you can be, because sometimes coaches have been greatly influential in people's lives. We know lots of stories about that. But back to the motivational or the positive talk, and what can go wrong with it is that you say to this rider who has low self-belief, oh, you got this, you're the best out there, whatever. And inside their head, you start to, they don't believe it. So they start to create a conflict in their heads. And what they start to do is start wrestling with that. And actually, that is something that can lower their self-confidence. With someone that has, like, I'm the kind of rider that I'm talking about, who has comes to you with a smaller sense of self-belief, or an anxious rider, you're better off to stay away from the motivational talk, go to the technical talk. And the technical talk is about what the rider's doing in the moment and developing keywords. So whether that's, inside rein, outside leg, things like that, and getting them to use them actually out loud, because then you're tying them into the task, and you're more likely to get them to a place where they can feel something good and know that they participated in it. So, and the more that kind of rider can get evidence, the more their confidence is going to grow. So it does work for some people. Sometimes I just want to throw that out there, that sometimes motivational talk can actually backfire. What I call horse talk has some possibility as well. And I'm not sure how many of you engage in this, but this is about taking the focus off the rider, helping them take the focus off of themselves and put it onto their horse. This also helps with nervous riders and with riders who get stuck in their heads. So asking them, what does your horse need from you today in this warm up? And, is it they need more confidence in moving forward? Do they need to check out the ring? And you can actually encourage, once you've talked about what the horse needs that day, encourage them to either in their head or out loud talk to their horse about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because again, this gets them focused off themselves, but onto something, onto their skills, onto applying their aids to make something happen. And that kind of self-talk, again, can help them grow confidence in a lot of different ways. I also find, on the subject of horse talk, because this is a team sport, that I think it's fun and very informative to check in once in a while with riders about how they feel about their horses. And in doing so, you start to get an idea of how confident they are in their mounts, or their partners, which is obviously very important. So you can play games like, okay, today before we start the lesson, we're going to talk about, if your horse was a person, what kind of personality would they have? What would be their two greatest attributes? What would be one annoying thing about them? What would they be like at a party? You can have some fun with this, even with younger kids. And what I like about kind of routinely doing that is it's kind of a temperature check on the relationship. And sometimes riders do get stuck in negativity and lose confidence in both themselves and the partnership. And we might miss that. We might miss that it is about the whole partnership. So if you start hearing a lot of negativity about their partner, then that's something that you can intervene with. And so what I mean by to get back to this idea of shared self-talk, making a larger space in their head, and you being there with them in the ring, is to collaborate again on what type of self-talk that they like using that seems to be effective for them. And so what happens there, and sometimes this happens very, very naturally, is that kids and adults will pick up on certain phrases, right, that you use while you're teaching them. And it might be a way of you describing getting to a certain place, a particular word or cue, and they adopt that. Well, you can go in deliberately and start to create more of that shared self-talk. And that gives you a little bit more assurance that at least, even though the critic is there, you're another voice. that's in the ring with them when they're trying to work through the challenge that they have for the day. Okay. Third one is developing a consistent approach to fear. And I added fear in here, and this could be an entire course we could do, but I wanted to touch on it because many of you did mention it in the survey, and it certainly is a very important part of coaching equestrian sport, because as we all know, this is not a risk-free sport. There are going to be fears to contend with, whether it's a kid or an adult, many different types of fears. And fears can obviously hold people back in terms of building their confidence. And when I say, again, to develop a consistent approach to fear yourself as a coach, this links us back to psychological safety. So if your riders know what how you typically approach fears, and that they can talk about fears, and it's a normal part of riding, then they're more likely to feel safe enough to work through that fear. It's sad when I talk to riders who really go through a lot of energy in order to hide their fears, either from their parents and their coaches or just from their coaches. But it happens far too often. So part of developing your approach is to know how you will assess the fear. And here are some things that I find important. One is to find out the source. So whether it's a kid or an adult, does this fear come from having an accident? Was there an injury associated with the accident? What happened in terms of the rider coming back from that, like their first steps, if you weren't with them? When did it start? So some people will say, oh, this fear started when I was 5, and others will say last week, or with this particular fall. So you want to know when it started, what the circumstances were. Is it physical and or mental? But I think for the purposes of talking today, we are talking mostly about physical fears because of the risk associated with horse sport and how to deal with them. You want to take into account the age and stage of the rider. So obviously you're going to deal with a child in a very different way than you are an adult. And when I say stage of rider, so we're talking about experience, but we're also talking about developmental stage of life. I'm sure a lot of you have already noticed this, but in particular with women, adult amateur riders, a lot of them do wrestle with physical fear. And it's a very actual natural progression from a developmental perspective, because these are women that perhaps have started to have children and realize that they are dependent for other, they're responsible for other people, and getting hurt means not being able to meet that responsibility. And this is something that's not even a lot of times articulated or the person is aware of, but these are pretty normal developmental milestones. The other thing is a rider who has had a significant number of injuries and again has learned through their own experience what it takes to recover from an injury, and especially as you get older. So that's a very common and easily understandable place for fear to arise. So these are places where it's very normal and expected that there's going to be a change in somebody's feeling of safety. And that's not where, I'm not saying that's where it needs to stay, but in terms of understanding it, the developmental stage of a rider and their history as well is very important. And equally important is to always take fear seriously, even if you think, wow, this rider is like capable of so much more. They can do it easily. Again, back to the motivational talk, you can talk to them all that you want, But if what's happening in their nervous system is a fight or flight response to a threat, you can't talk them out of that. That's not going to be helpful. It helps for you to begin with this process and talk to your students privately. A lot of people have shame around fear, even though there shouldn't be. And I believe there should be a little bit more of embracing the concept of fear and how actually fear also keeps us safe in equestrian sport, and start to take off some of those layers of shame for people. So you absolutely can get your riders to the other side, but plans should be individualized and they should be collaborative. So individualized because no one person is going to need the same kinds of things as the next. Yes, there's a formula that you can start to develop to follow. And the collaborative goes back to the rider's confidence. So if you come to them, they say, I have this fear, and you say, okay, we're going to fix that, and this is how we're going to do it. What you might get is even more overwhelm, which is not what you want. Back to the idea of, well, psychological safety and actual feelings in our nervous system of safety. If we have too much fight or flight going on, we're not capable of learning. And what happens when you start in a collaborative way with a rider is that they're going to feel involved. They're going to feel part of it. They're going to be able to comment on the steps that you're going to take, and they're going to be more likely to own it. And that's exactly what you want them to do. You don't want this just to be a one-time thing. You want to help this person actually rebuild or build their physical confidence. And part of doing that, I find, and I do this when I'm working with, actually any kind of significant traumatic injury, is certainly to review safety measures and skills that the rider has at their disposal to mitigate the physical risk. So that's not just wearing a helmet, but it's being able to talk about other things and teach other skills, like do your riders know how to do emergency dismounts, stops? Do you talk about what are their different options if their horse runs away? And sometimes these things don't get talked about because, well, what if I make the fear worse? Well, I guarantee you that you will make the fear worse if you're not open about riding having a certain risk. And yes, we're here to mitigate that risk as much as possible and leave you the most room for enjoyment. So with developing this collaborative individual plan, you want to make it gradual. You want to do it like a ladder. So you have steps that the two of you agree to take, and the first step is going to be something that might be a little bit challenging, but not so much that the rider's going to be feeling overwhelmed and, like I said, go into fight or flight. They're going to be able to execute that thing with a little bit of stress, but come out feeling like, okay, I think I've got this. And what you do is you build those steps together and you gradually move through them. And I will say here, what you're looking for in order to move a person to the next step is not an absence of any anxiety. Like it's not a matter of waiting until they get literally bored. It's more waiting until you see that anxiety dip a little bit and just move in that direction. Then you can move on to the next thing. Using rating scales is a really effective way of, again, creating a shared language, and go back to that idea, with your riders about where they are. because every writer is different. And one of the things I'm going to actually put into your package that you'll get in a couple of days is an example of a rating scale and a blank one that you are free to use with your writers, because I think it's a really important thing to create when you're working with someone with physical fear. So a rating scale of distress from 1 to 10 is going to look slightly different for everybody, but basically you're starting at 1 being, right, not very much. 5 is a middle ground where, well, you know, there's a challenge, there's a certain amount of stress there, but it's not overwhelming the writer's capacity to think. And at 9 or 10, you've lost them. They are in full fight or flight. This is when you might see accidents happening. You might see riders in kind of going into that freeze position and not riding. And learning cannot take place at that level of distress. So one of the things, and I will put this in the rating scales that I give to you and hope that you'll use, is that somewhere between 4 to 6 and 7 is where learning can occur. When you're getting above that, you're getting into a nervous system state that is ruled by your primitive brain or your fight or flight, and it is all about survival and overcoming the threat. And in essence, your students' frontal cortex is offline. So their ability to think in a problem-solving, systematic matter is gone. And that's why the rating scale is important, because if you say to someone, okay, we're going to do this step today, and, you know, initially when we talked about it, you said you thought it was going to be about a 5 out of 10. What do you think it is today? And, you know, they say it's a 7, then you need to investigate that. Otherwise, you could be setting them up for failure. So you always want to keep them in that amount of anxiety that is in where they're able to actually learn and move forward. Any overwhelm is going to pitch them back, which I know is not what you want. And you definitely want to watch for avoidance when you're dealing with fear. So actually, I was just remembering today that when I was coaching a young group at one point, every time I asked the group to canter, this little boy would come into the center of the ring and start fixing his boots. And he'd stay there and stay there and stay there, and until I figured out a way to get him back and, you know, doing some cantering steps and doing and moving forward with it. But yeah, so he was engaging in active avoidance, but he just didn't know it at the time, but that's exactly what he was doing. So avoidance could look like a rider not showing up for a lesson. It could look like not wanting to talk to you about things. It could look like them avoiding doing certain things that you're telling them are part of their homework, so to speak. Basically, avoidance is a natural place that we all go when we feel uncomfortable or we feel fearful. But the problem is that if you let anxiety or avoidance go unchecked, what you end up with is more fear. So even if, and this is also important about how you finish a lesson with a fearful rider, is that even if you need to go back a few steps in your plan and do that, perfectly okay. But you don't want to end on quitting something or avoiding doing something. And even if they're in tears, even if it's a small thing, you want to find something that they can do instead of avoid the whole thing. And you'll be that much further ahead the next time you come back to dealing with this problem. 4 is to assist your riders with their confidence bank. So I like using, and I use this analogy in the online course that I wrote, which the confidence factor. this analogy of we need to be mindful about what we are actually putting into our banks, and what goes into the confidence bank. They're all the experiences that we have, the knowledge that we have, the feedback that they get from you, and the specific preparation. So this gets back to the idea of confidence being knowing versus feeling. So instead of talking about, do you feel confident today? Do you not feel confident today? Making sure that you are creating experiences and supplying those students with knowledge that they can put into their bank, that they can then withdraw at the appropriate moment, like a show. Because doing is actually what matters most in the confidence game. Riders need to collect evidence of their competencies, not just feel good statements or positive self-talk. They need to know that they have overcome something. They need to know that they have learned something to a next level, and need to be able to feel that. And in terms of what you put in your rider's confidence bank, some other suggestions that I think are well worth planning out and teaching are teaching mistake recovery. Making mistakes, as we all know, is a part of sport and life. But I find that a lot of athletes, not just riders, are not coached or taught, or mistakes and how you recover from them is not talked about. And yes, it does take a little time to help that person develop their own way of responding to a mistake, or to develop a reboot, as I call it. And in terms of crafting lessons, I've often said to people, have a mistake recovery day where you're openly talking about mistakes, asking your riders how they deal with them now, how they might be able to tweak their mistake recovery plan, and setting up a small challenge that will make it likely for them to make some mistakes, not risky ones, but mentally risky ones, so that they can in real time practice their mistake recovery and talk it out, and get an idea of what helps them to keep moving forward. Another thing I think is a good idea to incorporate, and that riders can eventually put into their confidence bank, is to have high intensity days with your riders. So these are days, and certainly not every day, because if you overwhelm them every day, they wouldn't be able to learn. But having days where you surprise them with something, and they can know there's going to be a surprise, but they might not know what it is. And this could be anything from inviting all of the parents, right, to watch. And so increasing some, turning up the heat that way, so that they can get an idea again of how they respond under this pressure. And you can talk and teach to that after the fact. You can also have little competitions, right? You can have and have a lot of fun with it. Be creative. The person who best keeps their upper body position through an extremely long gymnastic or something like that gets all the marbles, and then actually you give them a few marbles. So nothing that's, going to spark necessarily jealous or anything, but has them laughing, but has them challenging themselves. You do need to encourage them to challenge themselves. Back to the idea that this isn't about comfort. Comfort doesn't grow people. We need to drop them into puzzles. There's another way to look at it. Some people say problems, but what you can do is, say, well, today is puzzle day, and you can construct this in many different ways. I know you guys are creative on that, and it could be as simple as, coming up with a something like an equitation write-off, or yeah. So there's many ways that you can construct puzzles, add some lightness to your teaching. And I would say don't be afraid to assign homework, so to speak. So discuss how your rider, how they can work on, and again, this should be collaborative, work on what they're working on, their goals, when they're hacking on their own, or even, it might be even things that you want them to read about, so that they can become better horse people. And so you can also go off horse, so to speak, and construct little assignments and things like that, that again, when riders get that kind of win, that's the thing that they can take with them to the bank. So try to keep things fresh. And this is just an example of a sample withdrawal that a rider made before a show. And actually, I find this exercise of deliberately asking and getting riders to write down what they have in that bank that they're going to withdraw and use is a really useful way of providing them with evidence, right? This is not, because nothing that goes in there is going to be just, right, positive self-talk. It's going to be about real experiences that they've had that relate to their challenge ahead. And especially for the nervous rider, nervous riders tend to, like, everyone's had the rider who starts to get nervous like 2 weeks before a show. Those kind of riders, all of a sudden you look at them and they look like they're at zero with their confidence, or that's what they tell you. And that's because they're starting to focus on potential threats. They're starting to worry, and what they actually have been doing in training starts to drift away from them, because a threat is always going to trump thinking about something else. So bringing them back to, hey, this is actually what you've done, or I want you to really reflect on this. So you can see that this rider has a number of different things. And at the bottom here, I will say that I hate math. That's, one of the reasons I went into the job that I did. But here's a place where I like math. So for this rider, it was collecting a total. So 8 jumps per course times 8 classes per show times 6 shows per year times 5 years, 1,920 trips in the ring to date. And no one can take that away from you. Or if you have someone, as in the last photo, has a fear of wide objects and death by triple bar, then you'd be constructing a different kind of equation there. And this is the way I like numbers, because it's very concrete. When you point out to someone, just how many oxers or how many triple bars they have successfully jumped, then it can bring back, right, those memories and connect them with their confidence. So just in closing, I went longer than I wanted to, because I wanted to spend more time with questions, but I'll just say that your own coaching is the strongest piece of evidence for your program. And the strongest, I think, piece of evidence for how you're doing, if you're wanting to create more confident riders, is to watch, right? What is in common about how your riders are turning out. So I just made up this image because to me, this might be an image of what your end game is someone sitting at the end gate, being able to say, I have a plan. I'm not afraid to risk out there. If I make a mistake, I can work it out. I can work through it. My coach has got my back. I have a plan that I'm going to execute. So I would think that this might be an example of an end game that you would like. But we'll find out when we get to our questions, which is just about now. And I think Jessica is going to lead us in on this.
Awesome, April. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I thought that was really great. For me, especially the part you said about the mistake recovery, that really hit home because that's something I try to, as a coach, prepare my students for. And I have a question to start things off.
Sure.
You talked a lot about um, students that are sort of timid versus bold. And I just had a quick question. Besides the things that you already mentioned, how would you address riders that are maybe like more optimistic or think they can do more than they can mentally or physically? If they're coming up with sort of that sort of thing instead of like the nervous ones, is there anything you would do about that? Not specifically talking about kids. I'm talking about more about like adult riders.
Right. Yeah. And that's, that's why one reason why I think it's always important to, well, I find it useful to use the idea or the template of collaboration, because obviously part of your job as a coach is to assess, current skill level and what that's appropriate for and what you're both working towards. And certainly you can, I think with a rider like this, instead of feeling like you have to take the negative and say, no, that's not quite something that you're ready for, that maybe that, the positive to find in there is that, I really like your enthusiasm. That's awesome. It's good that you're optimistic and, you're willing to get in there, but, it's been my experience that you're going to do best if we outline our goals to gradually take you to that place that you want to go, and make sure that you feel you're prepared. This is where that you can use the know versus feel. Know that you're prepared versus just feel positive about it. And you can even include, I think, that's where you can say it's, part of my job is to guide you in terms of safety and, appropriate progression.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree that the safety standpoint is a huge thing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
In the chat, we have Maya answered or asked a question. She said, you mentioned physical and mental fear. What is the difference between those? And she also said, thank you. This was all super helpful.
Okay. So physical fear is literally a fear of getting hurt. So falling off, being out of control. And yes, usually getting hurt. Whereas mental fear is usually, about making errors, about being afraid to make errors, about, riding to be perfect, and not tolerating, wanting perfection, not tolerating mistakes very well. And that too can obviously can hold a rider back. I think coaches probably in this sport deal with a lot of perfectionists. But perfectionism is a good example of mental fear. And it's, again, a whole nother topic. And but I will say that one of the things maybe that, when you're giving feedback to Jessica and Kathleen about this session, is that if you really feel strongly that there's one area you want expansion on, would be interested in, that you can let them know. And, that just enables us to, if we're planning another one, to, to tailor it more to your needs.
Perfect. Maya said, thank you for that. I just thought of something else. For somebody who's coming back from a physical fall or something, is there anything extra you'd add in like if they were having like fairly mental or big mental blocks or anything along the way that you think would be helpful for them?
Well, I think that's why when you're dealing with fear, you need to make an individualized plan and need to understand what your rider's fears are and how that breaks down to, like I said, constructing a bit of a ladder about, so if it's something about coming back from an injury and jumping again, for example, the first step might be a pole on the ground, or someone that's even afraid to get on post-accident. The first step might be literally walking their horse around the arena, not getting on yet, or sitting. And none of these are, it's important to realize none of these are silly steps, even though, I hear a lot of riders say, oh, but I used to be able to do that. I don't want to do that now. That's embarrassing. Well, when we develop a physical fear, it does mean that our fight or flight is engaged, and we can't just shut that off. We need to respect it and respect that our sense of safety has changed, and we have to sort of rebuild it with that experience in mind. So no step is too small. It varies from rider to rider. It is definitely good to have a sort of a return to ride plan that includes that ladder, but it might also include other professionals, like whether it's someone like myself or like a physiotherapist, if there is, because sometimes part of the confidence that's lost is through the injury. And so someone helping them regain strength with that injury, ensuring that they're moving forward, that they are doing the right kinds of exercises at home to increase their strength and thereby their confidence. That was a long answer. I'm not sure if I answered everything. Does that?
No, that's all great. Yeah, just very gradual. I think like as riders, we're so focused on where we should be or where we were. It's hard to just be okay with where we are now and where we're going, and be okay to have that, like be able to take that step back. So
yes,
that was really
and
good.
and that's why I like the idea of, maybe more coaches talking openly about fear and, maybe digging up some good examples of, because there's lots of them out there, of professional riders who have, dealt with a serious fall and come back from that. And that it's not an easy process, and it's a very human process. It can be done, but you need the right kind of support. And that, it's going to be within this kind of sport where you have physical risk as part of the deal. It makes sense that when that is, that sense of safety is altered, that you need to find your way back a little differently. It's not unlike for some people being involved in a bad car accident and not wanting to drive again and avoiding driving and or pushing themselves. But that's what I was going to say, to get back to the idea of pushing either yourself or someone else is going to send that person backwards, right? Because anytime get out of that range in terms of our anxiety, how high it is, there's no learning can take place. And that's what we need to happen.
Yeah, the mental part is such a big aspect of it. I don't think we recognize or appreciate that enough. And with horse training too, because if a horse is scared or nervous, it doesn't learn as well.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm just looking through the chat here for a second. A couple of comments, super helpful and informative, lots of tips and ideas that can be put into practice. Speaking less of motivation to bring a rider up was a light bulb moment. excellent points that they're going to take forward to her beginner lesson kids. Yeah, self-talk tips and how they need to be different.
Mhm.
And says, thank you for this awesome session. Yes, this will be able to be rewatched. We have recorded this and we're gonna upload it on the AHTA YouTube channel.
And I could just say, Jessica, when you mentioned self-talk, I think it's fun to have. Another thing you could do with self-talk is to kind of have a bring your inside voice out day lesson where, again, you're encouraging riders to try on types of self-talk. You can, like with the kids, they love things like writing bits of their self-talk on sheets of paper and maybe putting them on jumps or putting them around the barn, and just so really bringing awareness to that topic in a fun way.
Yeah, and in an empowering way as well, because not a lot of times we're allowed to say those things about ourselves, which is awesome. We should definitely be encouraging that. Another comment, this was fabulous. Would love to delve into the mental fear further into another session, specifically with those riders that are looking for perfectionism and they're continually having negative self-talk and finding fault with their rides.
I could share actually one of my light bulb moments. Funny how we really do have like impactful moments that we remember so many years later. But at one point myself, when I had switched to riding with a different coach, and yes, I will admit that I was a bit of a perfectionist, and he was talking to me that first day and saying, so, what do you think that this horse needs to improve upon or whatever? And I said, well, straightness and activate. Okay, those are the same thing. I'm going to tell you what I think that you need to get better at. And I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of, you need to get better at making mistakes. And just kind of looked at him like, what are you talking about? But then the way actually he went on to explain it is he said, you ride well, it's not a compliment, but he said, what happens is that you are teaching this horse how not to ever fill in for you and how not to cope. So if you need him to take off from a tight space or a longer space in a jump off, he's not going to be able to help you out. So you're so cautious about where you put him and are so perfectionally oriented in that way that ironically, he has less confidence in helping you. That one stuck with me. That was the thing that kind of like, he's right. I need to get better at making mistakes.
That's a huge thing for our cross-country horses because nothing is ever perfect usually. So we want them to be able to think on their feet and fill in
and help you.
Yes, exactly. Because we're not perfect all the time. None of us are 100%. All right. Jen asked, what would be some steps to pull a rider out of fight or flight mode when they are in it? And hi, Jen, I miss you.
So can I just ask a little bit more about the circumstance? What it just gets more specifics, or
it doesn't? I'm sure she could type more, or if she wants to pop in on the video and ask.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't specifically have a specific situation. Just for people who are high anxiety in life in general, being in that fight or flight mode sort of struck a bell with me, and I feel like I probably live there, and I know many riders who live there in the saddle a lot of the time. So how to ground yourself and bring yourself out of your head and back into the moment. And I miss you too, Jess.
This is great. We're having reunions and everything. So one of the best ways that I like, and actually this is going into a course that I'm just finishing, that I've been finishing for a while, but I will finish it, called Mindful Riding. And so mindfulness practices are a wonderful way to help people and yourself start to shift from the state of fight or flight. So, and this is like a really common exercise that's used for trauma, people with panic attacks, all kinds of people that tend to lose connection with the present moment, which is what fight or flight really does do to you. So it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's essentially, naming 5 things that you can see in your environment, 4 things that you can hear, 4 things that you can touch. So that, like, if you're in the saddle, that can be touching your horse's mane. It can be like just feeling the weight in your heels, or sitting back in your saddle. You can experiment with those things that you can feel. 4 things that you can hear, yes, and 3 things that you can. Where am I? I'm forgetting my senses. 3 things, smell, and then taste is the last one, which it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use all of the senses when you're doing this. What people do find, though, is that they find that there are senses that ground them more than others. So even just naming things, for example, in your environment and looking at them a little longer, so you're slowing yourself down, you're connecting with stuff in the environment. And what this does in bringing you back to the present is that it's not really a cognitive thing. It's actually on the level of your nervous system. It starts to settle because it's not detecting, any major threat. So if you think of like the little rabbit that, we've seen lots of those lately, who runs into the middle of a field and, thinks it sees a dog walking down the street, so goes into a freeze state and pretends to be a rock. And then the dog passes and you see the rabbit kind of pop its head up and check around its environment. And this is what it's exactly doing. It is like, okay, I don't think there's any threat anymore. I'm going to carry on. So he checks his environment to help with his safety, to help him shift out of fight or flight. We can do the same thing. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm working on that course, and I'm really excited about that one because I think mindfulness there's 2 that I'm working on that I think 2 skills that have become really important to develop over the course of the pandemic, not just from a riding perspective, but from a human perspective. And one is mindfulness and the other is self-compassion. So I'm turning those 2 ideas into online courses that that will tackle those in terms of your riding and your humanness.
So Colleen asked, what kind of mental exercises would you recommend to riders for homework to help overcome fear?
So here's where you can utilize visualization, because and you can actually combine visualization with the fear ladder that you've created with them. And you can, for example, send them home to visualize their next step so that they can experience how they're going to feel about that, how they're going to approach it before they actually get there. That's one idea. And I will say that like I'm going to give you guys a coupon code for the courses that I have, which are confidence visualization, riding through fear, and the resilient rider, which is more about mental toughness. And there's definitely things in there that you can extrapolate to use with your students. So if you read it from a coach's lens, you can definitely use things. But that would be an example of something that you could send them home with. And, you know, the other thing I'll say about, for some people that I found has really helped with fear, is having the opportunity to watch someone else ride their horse and do certain things with their horse, because that allows them to actually to tune into, again, what this horse is capable of and what it can do and the ways in which it is safe, and do that from out of the saddle. That can be really useful.
Perfect. Thank you for that, April. Just a couple other comments. Thanking you for a great talk and for us to put this on. Tammy asks, how do you have the conversation with the riders where the horse is not the right match and is in part or in whole causing the lack of confidence in the relationship?
Yeah.
There's of course the classic green rider, green horse, but there are many other situations where this is a reality. And so much of it, what she sees is, I love this horse, as opposed to, I feel safe with this horse.
Yeah, that's really hard, because I know that we love our horses, and sometimes there are really big mismatches. And in fact, I think it's online somewhere, but at one point I wrote an article about, is it time to make up or break up, or is it time to break up, kind of thing. And I guess that's one analogy to use with rider, is that, you know, not all relationships are meant for certain things. Sometimes we need to be clear about, you know, what we expect from that relationship. And so you're talking about safety and ability to learn. And so it's not that either one of you are bad, horse or rider. It's just that at this point in your development, this relationship is holding you back. And it is hard for riders. I think a lot of them see it as a failure. So it's a very, it can be a hard and emotional conversation to have. But I think as much as you can normalize that, because they're not the only ones that have faced that tough decision, had to make that decision. There certainly are, and that's why I wrote that article, certainly are a lot of riders that have. But now I can tell you on the flip side that the riders, once they get through the grief part and are reestablished in a more suitable relationship, do recognize how much they're moving forward again. So there's no easy answer with that conversation. It is tough to have, but doing a lot of normalizing and ensuring that they don't blame themselves, or doing your best you can, of course.
Perfect. Thank you. I guess that's where some people have to, well, a lot of us have to feel like that it's okay. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, but it's okay.
Yeah. Just like every relationship we have, doesn't, right? So
exactly. Yeah. It's always a learning experience, no matter what you get from it. Always good things, bad things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think that is all the questions I see on the chat. I'll just give everybody another minute in case they want to pop in and ask another question, or if you want to pop in the chat. I do want to thank April again for doing this talk for us. This was awesome. and it will be available on YouTube. We'll get it uploaded in the next couple of days for everyone. And April will have a coupon code for those who want to check out more of her courses and that sort of thing. And also want to thank Kathleen for setting this up. Kathleen Ziegler, HTA High Performance Chair. And also thank you to the Alberta Horse Trials Association for sponsoring this talk, which is awesome. And we're going to be doing another one in February, and we will be releasing more details about that shortly in the next probably week or so. So yeah, so I don't see any more questions.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
April,
really
do you have any parting words?
good questions. Like the
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
And yes, that I will be giving you, Jessica, some stuff to pass along, like a handout from this, and the fear rating scale that I talked about, and the coupon code. Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you, Jessica, and you, Kathleen, for organizing this. It was a very seamless experience, and really nice to see so many riders participating.
And it was a great turnout. Thanks everybody for coming. So I guess we'll send everybody off here. Thanks again, April. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Kathleen. And we will see you all soon, hopefully.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye.